how's it going, everyone? As Brandon mentioned, my name's Mu Yu, and I've been in the industry for a little bit over 15 years now. Mostly I've been a gameplay programmer, but I do wear lots of different hats at different times, and I'll kind of get onto that as we go on. And I don't need to do too long of an intro because basically the whole talk is a giant long intro. Let's get started. I guess the question that I found myself thinking about is just, do I belong in the industry? And it's a question that I constantly end up asking myself. And as time goes on, I feel like what it means to me changes dramatically, but I'm always trying to think of, do I belong in this industry, or should I go do something else? Is it welcoming to me? That kind of thing. I'm going to talk about some of the times I've asked the question, how it's changed throughout my career, and some of the things and actions I've taken to adapt to the industry. We got to start at the beginning. So the first time I found myself asking the question if I belonged in the industry was right after my Insomniac Games interview. It was finals week in college. I just spent 2 hours in their offices and I was blown away. It was really magical. And I just thought there's got to be some way that I can be part of this thing. But at the same time, I could see like how competent they were and how smart everyone was. And I just felt like there's no way they're going to let me join this company. I remember that eerie feeling, and I remember it was really punctuated because I'll tell the long story another time, but I accidentally almost stole a car on my way back to getting home, and that was really, really weird. But it was just a really surreal experience. But the thing I wanted to focus on is that the first time I was asking, do I belong in the industry, it was a question that I was asking other people to answer. It wasn't something I was thinking about myself or anything. It was very much, what does Insomniac Games think, and do they think that I'm a fit for their company and the industry? It was completely out of my hands, and it was a really, natural place to be, but it was definitely powerless from my perspective. And when I look back on it now, it really seems like an attitude that is a little bit dangerous at times, because, having that mentality, you'll work on any project, you'll work on, pretty much anything, you'll work crazy hours, you'll do things that maybe you shouldn't be doing if you were thinking about yourself. I was lucky enough that they did, let me, come on to work on Ratchet and Clank. I didn't get the position I applied for, but they gave me a different one. And it was cool. Like 4 days later, I walked into the Insomniac offices. I sat down at my desk and I felt like, this is crazy. Like I feel like I belong in this industry. Like they've welcomed me in. I've kind of got past the gates. But then I started trying to work. And I thought I was a pretty good programmer at college. I taught a lot of people other stuff. Like I was usually the lead of my project, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I really, really struggled for the first week. And then the second week, I struggled even more. And the third week was terrifying. I remember I came in on the Monday of the third week, and two of us had been hired at the same time, the guy that got the position I applied for and me. And I come in on the third week and he's gone. And I didn't even know what to think. And I asked what happened. They said, they had to let the guy go because he just wasn't keeping up with, the rate of technology and how fast it was moving. And they just thought that he was sort of left behind. And that terrified me. Just the idea that I just got in the industry and I didn't realize that at any point the industry can just move out from under you. And that really defined my thinking of my first couple of years in the industry. 2 weeks later, I find myself thinking like, my version of do I belong in the industry now is constantly thinking, am I good enough skill-wise? Am I staying ahead of the curve? Am I learning things fast enough? And the terrifying afterthought is like, even if that's true now, like how long is that going to last? So I really became obsessed with becoming the best programmer that I could be. But I think the good thing is that I was asking a question of myself. But I think the bad thing was that I was very much defining myself in terms of what the industry needed from me, and specifically what Insomniac needed of me. And it wasn't that they wanted anything bad of me, but it was just that I was very much in the mindset of just serving someone else. And I think that gets a little bit dangerous. And for me, where it started getting a little bit the table started turning a little bit, and I started thinking a little bit more. Was I one of my friends got in contact with me, and I call him my friend, but this guy was like 8 years older than me, and we went to church together when I was a kid, and I always looked up to him. And one of the reasons I had interest in programming was that he became a professional programmer. My parents told me that he was making lots of money, and it was great. And when I started Insomniac, he was sort of like, "Oh my God, how did you get this amazing job? I really look up to you. Can you help me out?" And I was like, "You've been programming for like 10 years. What do you mean? I don't understand." And he explained to me that, he had a job at a government agency where they did a very narrow thing. And the first year, he was learning all kinds of new things on how to do the kinds of simulations that they were doing. But for the last 9 years, he was just kind of doing the 1 year of experience 10 times. And I just thought, it really really hit me because I just worked on, Ratchet and Clank 3, Ratchet and Clank 4, Ratchet and Clank 5. I started thinking, like, am I really learning new things anymore? Like, am I still developing? Because, in the back of my head, there's that industry that's going to slip out from under you. That's the thing that's constantly terrifying me. And I just felt like I can't do this. I feel like I'm just going to get left behind if I just keep, typing out Ratchet games. And I had a friend that, basically called it that. He's like, it's typing time. You're not really thinking anymore about how you're developing things or what you're doing. You're just typing the game you already know how to do. And so the obvious thing would have been for me to move on to a game called Resistance. Insomniac was also developing this first-person shooter that was like, realistic graphics for the PlayStation 3 launch title. And I thought about that for 1 second, and immediately something inside of me was just like, no, you don't want to work on Resistance. And it was weird. Like, it just hadn't occurred to me that until that point that I really should be thinking about what do I want to work on. So I found myself thinking, well, Insomniac is definitely something I'm going to have to move on to. But I have all these other questions about, like, is this sustainable for me? Where do I want to go? And one of the questions I was asking is, like, is it possible for me to have a life and make games at the same time? I was working just crazy hours at Insomniac, and they would ramp up at the end of each year when we went to release the game. And one of the side effects of that is any friends that I made around, July to September, I would disappear for 3 months, and then come, the next couple of months, it's time to make new friends because everyone's already, forgotten me. That was one big question that was on my mind. The second thing is, like, can I actually develop as a programmer? Can I find somewhere where I can keep learning more about programming and, fight that curve and prevent the industry tidal wave from crashing on me? And I wasn't sure, but I think that was the one I was most optimistic about. But the thing that I thought was most interesting was that I started thinking about, like, do I want to make the games that the industry wants me to make? And that actually was a line in the sand for me. And I think, I mean, you'll see very shortly that I was very much tested on this. And I think the decision that I made is, like, I need to find somewhere that I can keep learning to program better. And then I need to work somewhere where I'm not making basically murder simulators. And so those are the two ground rules I set for myself to, like, find a place in the industry. And, like, it may have been just the worst time possible to grow a backbone, because I asked around all the LA studios and checked out what they were working on. Everyone's working on, games where you have assault rifles or pistols at the very least, and you're shooting people. And I asked around, some more studios in California, and, like, I talked to recruiters that did, like, sort of like a nationwide search for me, and every project was, some kind of gray or brown shooter. I think it was the year that, like, Half-Life 2 came out, and Doom 3 and Gears of War, and even, like, I think they just released a Halo and didn't make another one for ages. So I think at that point I kind of thought maybe the games industry isn't for me, and I just kind of resigned myself to start looking for jobs elsewhere. But luckily, I got bailed out because at GDC 2007, Little Big Planet was announced, and one of my friends happened to have a connection there, and it was just the perfect game. Like, in the same way that viscerally Resistance was a game like I knew I didn't want to work on, Little Big Planet was everything I was hoping for. So it was creativity, it was cooperation, it was really lovely in terms of, like, the vibe and the bright colors. And so I luckily got a meeting with the Media Molecule team at E3 when they were in town in LA. And, luckily for me, they wanted me to join their team. So I packed up my bags and moved to the UK, where I still am now. And I joined the Little Big Planet team, and it was just an amazing experience. I mean, it was like, I think about like when I went from thinking I was a smart guy in college and going to Insomniac and being definitely the dumbest person in the room. It was that again. And so just, being full in a room full of talent was really inspiring. I learned so much about programming. But I think because of the creative tools we were developing, and also because I was able to sit in the game designer area, I learned actually it wasn't the programming skills that were going to get me to my next step in my career. Like, I very much realized that, like, it's how I interact with people, and it's how I take the time to understand what a game designer is trying to do, or what an artist is trying to do with a feature, and like how can I make the tools that make their lives easier, or make the tools that match the way that they think about their creative process. So yeah, I had a really great time working on Little Big Planet, and lo and behold, there's a pattern in the industry. They said, "Oh, and we're going to start working on Little Big Planet 2," and I immediately just thought back to what my friend had said about the same year of experience 10 times. I just thought, okay, I need to move on, but I'm really inspired by what they've done. And so I started thinking again, okay, this is the time that I was just like, okay, well, I saw what they did, and it really made me think, I can't just think about what I don't want to work on. I need to think about what is the actual change I want to have. Like, what are the games I actually want to make? And instead of like, where the last step was, okay, what does the industry happen to be making? Do I want to make that? I started thinking about, well, like, how can I make the industry want the games I want to play, and the games I want to make? And I think that was really important for me, because I just thought back to that situation where I was sort of at the whim of the industry, that if I hadn't met the Media Molecule founders, I would have just left the industry. And I think there's so many talented, creative, interesting people that, would be interested in the industry and would have come around looking at that time and just found a bunch of murder simulators and realized, oh, you know what, this is an industry for me. I'm moving on. So I just thought about how much talent we're losing, and how I guess powerless I felt in that situation. So I started thinking about what are the kinds of games that I want to make. And so I guess the main thing was, like, I was focused on themes, like I was focusing on how do I make a game with positive themes that engage new audiences? Because I guess the other part of it is that I felt like if I don't make the games that appeal to new types of players, I'm not going to be able to continue to make games that appeal to new types of players. Like, at the end of the day, it is the games industry, and it is a business. And so for me, it was trying to think about, how do we make the games that draw in new types of players to ensure that we can make a more broad range of games in the future? And I thought back to the Media Molecule founders and what they did, and I just thought, yeah, it was just amazing. They came together, they decided what game they wanted to make, they made it. It was hugely profitable, and it was, a huge cultural success. And I thought, well, I guess the way they did that was they started a company. So I decided it's time to start a company. So I started a Facebook games company, and we made a game called Monstrosity. And it was a game about nurturing little monsters. It was about playfulness and growth and creating safe environments for role play. And, I really enjoyed working on it. And it's interesting because I always talk about this like it was like this massive disaster. But actually, I think there were a lot of things that went right. I mean, I think there's a lot more things that went wrong, obviously, and I'll get to that. But it was an interesting experience. I think, it wasn't sustainable as a company, and we ended up having to shut it down. And it was, incredibly stressful. I think the one thing that I remember the day I made the decision, and it was like, as a small team, I came to work, and the first thing I did was, like, I checked all the community messages and responded to them. Then I started working on some features that were requested. And then I started doing, like, some of the back-end programming, because it was easier at that point for me to do the back-end programming than to ask our back-end programmer. And then I had to, like, do, like, our business development stuff. I was, had pitches and phone calls to answer. And then I was doing QA on the features I just done. And I had a freelance artist that I was art directing. And it was way too much for me, and I just couldn't sustain it. And, like, every time we released new updates, like, the revenue wasn't growing, and like the unsustainability of the business met the unsustainability of my stress. And I decided that we just had to shut the whole thing down. Um, and so interestingly, like after a failure like that, you'd think that I was ready to leave the industry again, and I was, contemplating my state of existence. And I just, would be in this state again where I'm just like, what am I doing? Do I belong here? But actually, I wasn't asking it at that moment. And I think the reason was kind of interesting. Like, I think firstly, like, it was a failure, but there were positives. Like, we had millions of players, we were making some money, not enough, and I didn't have enough help. But one thing that was really nice about not having enough help is that I got to try on so many different hats. And there's a lot of nice things about like being a small company and having to wear a lot of hats. And the first thing is that you just appreciate everyone that normally wears those hats. Like, I think before then, there's times where I'm like, this department, they're not pulling their weight, or their job's easy. Why are they making my life so hard? And really, everyone's job is hard. And I think it took trying to do a lot of those jobs to make me realize that. And I think the other thing is that because I had such a huge appreciation for some of these roles, like, it made me just start appreciating that so much more and the people I met. And it started making me build a community of people that were really good at doing the things that I was really, really bad at. But the other side of things is that there were a lot of hats that I was wearing that I wasn't so bad at, and especially some that I was really surprised by. I think community management was something that I was surprisingly not bad at, and I really enjoyed. And despite being a programmer who usually is terrible at anything social, that was a big surprise to me. And I think I never would have gone down that route if I wasn't forced to. And I'm really glad that I did, because it's something I really enjoyed doing. Even to this day. But the other one was business development. I just thought, business development is for, I thought business development for white guys who could shout really loud. And I actually, that wasn't my brand of it. But, when we were running the company, I got very close to raising money. And I think there was a point where, I was talking to VCs and they seemed really interested, but I didn't have the confidence that I could move forward and continue running the company, even if I had funding. That I just thought, it's not really worth pursuing these avenues and pitching. But I wanted to get better at business development and running a business. I just wasn't sure how. So I think I didn't want to leave the industry because I thought there's this thing I'm really excited about, and I want to learn more about it. And so I needed to train up. And like, I guess this is sort of where I would have like cut together a montage if I had any video editing skills. And I actually, have tried to edit videos, and it's one of those examples of things that you try and realize you're terrible at. So yeah, there's no montage video here. But I started thinking about like, what was it that helped me develop my programming skills early in my career, and could I replicate that same thing for business development? And the thing that I realized is, so when I came back and that seat was empty, I freaked out because that guy got fired. He had way more experience than I did. But then an hour or two later, someone moved into that seat, and that person actually ended up being my mentor for the next 2 or 3 years and taught me, almost everything I know about game programming. And the thing that I realized most about him was that he made sure that I had a safe environment where I could experiment with things and take risks and fail. And he was a really, really important mentor to me. And the story I tell about like my fondest memory of the video games industry is still the time that we were trying to make disc builds for Ratchet 3. It was the first, game I'd ever worked on. And they're like, we're going to make disc builds. And for weeks they were like, okay, we're going to try and make the first disc build. And every time they're like, the disc didn't build, the disc didn't build. And they'd be like, okay, we're making a disc build. Don't check anything in. We're making a disc build. And, for 2 weeks they'd been saying that. And I'd never seen a disc had never been made. And so, again, they come through, say, don't check anything in. I check in stuff. And lo and behold, the disc builds. And the disc builds, and they load up the disc, and it crashes on load, and it's the thing I just checked in. And I was petrified. And I just remember, this guy, my mentor, Tony, they come back and they're just like, who checked in code? What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And Tony was just like, just go make another disc. Leave us alone. This shit happens all the time. Go away. And it was just such an eye-opening moment for me, because like I felt like I was going to get fired. I mean, I always felt like I was going to get fired. But that Tony made sure that I was safe to take those risks and make mistakes. And he was always there to tell me, what risks I took that were good and what risks I took that were bad. And, it was pretty obvious to me when things paid off and when things blew up in my face as well. So I think that's the thing. I think, what I learned is that one, I had to really have a reason that I wanted to develop this skill, and it's because I didn't want to get fired. And I had to be bad at it to learn to get better. And I think one of the important things there is that I think about now is that there's times where I really want to develop a skill, but I don't actually try. I just do a bunch of research. And I feel like that's valuable, but that's not growing. I think it's not until you're actually trying to do something and failing at something that you do grow. And given that, I think the only way to grow is to have an environment where you have mentors and where you can fail and where it's safe. And so, I thought back to how I learned and developed my programming skills, and I thought I want to do that same thing for BizDev. And lucky enough, there was a company that was working really closely with us when we launched our Facebook game, because they hadn't launched yet and they wanted information about, how they thought their launch was going to go. And so they, asked me a lot of things and asked me about a lot of the business decisions I was making and, gave me advice on things. But they said, they really valued me as a business person, and they wouldn't bring me on as a full-time business person, but they'd bring me on as a programmer, and but they'd still involve me in all game design and all business decisions. And I think a lot of companies would say that to recruit someone and then just fob them off when it came through. But really, this company was amazing to me. They were a Silicon Valley venture-backed company. They'd raised something like $2.5 million or something like that for the seed round. So, it was really interesting for me to work with them and for them to let me try and make some decisions and try and contribute to the conversation, and for them to mentor me and teach me what I was doing wrong and why my first company failed. And it was just, an incredible opportunity for me. And it just makes me think about, people that provide those safe spaces for people to grow. And so, I developed those skills, and I thought I'm kind of at that point where I'm researching again and I'm not doing. And I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to try to test out my skills again. And I feel pretty good about my programming skills, and I feel okay about my business skills. So it was time to try again, and that was Knights and Bikes. I was the sole programmer on the game. So I programmed the game, which had 3 different modes. One was that you could play single player with an AI partner. So the whole game had to work with either characters being AI, and for moments where both of them are AI, from weird bugs that we found, where both players were controlled locally for local co-op, and then for the version of the game that you could play online co-op. I think that was really an aggressive goal for me, and I think it went well, and I, still feel pretty good about my programming skills. And the business side, I think, went well too. I think, we ran a successful Kickstarter campaign. We got a publishing deal shortly after that. We negotiated a book deal, and 3 incredible books have come out. Knights and Bikes has 3 books based in this universe written by Gabrielle Kent, and they're on sale now. And we even signed a deal for a TV series that's currently in development. So, I think all around I felt like, okay, my skills are developing at a rate where I don't feel necessarily I need to go back and find a safe space for growing my business skills. I feel pretty good about those 2 skill sets. So you think after a success like that, I'd be of course I belong. I'm awesome. I did everything. It was great and blah, 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 blah. But I find myself again, asking, is there a place for me in the industry? And it's weird that after my failure, I'm I definitely belong here. And then after my success, I'm I don't really know. But there's more to it. The first thing is that there's 2 things that have changed in, I guess, my life in the world. The first one is that last year my son was born. And as some of you can imagine, and some of you have experienced, when you have a child, all of your priorities get shifted, all of your available time gets eaten up, and all of your financial risk tolerance just vanishes, poof, in midair. And so that's changed a lot about my perspective on, how I can take creative risks and that kind of thing. But the other thing is that my eyes were open to representation. And I think growing up as, in a Chinese person in the Western world, I just kind of thought they're never going to tell my story. Like I'm never going to actually feel represented in the media. And, I think, every now and then something would come along and they'd be like, oh, this is like the next big Asian film. And I'd watch it and I'm like, I don't really get it. But what changed my mind first was a game called Florence. I think it did an incredible job of, packaging a universal story that everyone could understand with like specific details that are specific to Florence and her heritage. And I really felt those things really, really strongly. I was on a plane back from GDC actually, and I was just crying my eyes out the whole time. And more recently, I saw the film Tiger Tail on Netflix by Alan Yang, and how specifically it captured the Taiwanese American immigrant experience was mind-blowing for me. Like if you would have told me that they had spies inside my house and captured the story of my parents, I would have believed you. And I think actually feeling represented really opened my eyes to a lot of things, to how important that is. And I think representation matters for people, who aren't represented enough so that they don't feel alone. But I think, we're seeing now more than ever that representation matters for everyone else. Just to remind, it's sad that it requires reminding, but to remind everyone that we're all human and we should all be treated as such. And so those are the two things that are really on my mind now, as a games person, of just like, can I make games that tell new stories? And can I do that without, leaving my family abandoned on the street, basically? So yeah, it gets so complicated for me now because, I guess the first question is like, are there new stories that I can help tell? And it even makes me think like, do I have a story to tell? And I'm not really sure yet. And it makes me think about like, well, are there people out there who want to work with me that have these stories that I could help tell? But then there's the other side of like, is there a financial balance for trying to change the industry and change the audience and build an audience without, incurring the huge financial risk on myself? And I'm just getting older and older. And I think about how long, I've been working on Knights and Bikes. And it makes me wonder, like, do I still have time to try to make these changes and to try and grow and try and learn the new skills I need? So yeah, I'm genuinely in a phase right now where I'm asking myself if I belong in the industry, and I have some time to make the decision. Like one, like I'm not of sound mind. I'm not sleeping because the baby doesn't let me. But I still have some work on Knights and Bikes to finish up. So, that's one thing to focus on. And I'm working also at a company where I do get to work with a writer and think about storytelling and the tools for storytelling and that kind of stuff. So I don't really know yet, but I still have time to decide, I feel. But what I do know is that, I need to skill up on storytelling skills myself and the story or the skills required to help others tell stories. I need to find collaborators that have stories that they want to tell. But more importantly, like it's really important to me to make sure to contribute to making the industry a place where more people feel like they belong, because it's just a virtuous cycle. Like if we can't, have the audience for interesting new games, then we can't have the interesting new people to make them, and like so on and so forth. And I just feel like, that pinwheel has got to start somewhere. And one of the ways that I'm trying to help that out is I'm part of a group called Puck and Play. We're based in the UK and we're dedicated to supporting people of color in the games industry. But there's so many great initiatives going on right now on that front that I feel like that's, it's one of the things I do feel certain about in these really uncertain times. But yeah, that's sort of where I am. I wish I could have finished it with something more concrete and inspirational, but I don't know what's in my future. But I think the point of this talk is that it's really important to take the time to think about yourself, where you fit in the industry, where you want the industry to grow, and what growth you need to make that happen. And, and along with the growth you need, what environments you need to make that growth happen. So thanks for your time, everyone.
All right, Mew. Well, thank you, man. It has been a fantastic time. And, one of these things, being the first guy up, have always been a challenging proposition, but I think you did great. And I think your story especially is something that that we all kind of look forward to as a game developer. Your journey is something very similar, right? You're talking about all those times that you wanted to quit. I mean, during this stream, there were times that I wanted to quit because of things, getting the jitters out all the time. It's always tough, man. It's always tough, but like as the day goes through and then getting the rhythm, it gets easier. So in the very short way of kind of summarizing your experience in the game industry, it feels a lot in that way. We keep going back to it because, at least for me, I don't know what else to do, man. I'm not really good at anything. I'm pretty useless with my hands, and I just love game development, and it's one of the biggest reasons why, because I feel like I see professionals such as yourself who have figured out a way, right, through this turmoil, through these confusing times. You've somehow kind of pieced together a path for yourself, and just learn by stumbling, which is one of the biggest takeaway that I got from your talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key is that, like, stumbling is a privilege of sorts, right? Like, I think like having the ability to do so is something that I'm very grateful for. And I actually think about, the guy that taught me that lesson about the 1 year of development 10 times, is that, he wasn't in a financial position where he could take a risk, where he could grow and learn and, develop himself as a programmer and move to an industry like I did. Because, he did get in touch with me throughout the years, and he's always jealous of, how I get to work in the games industry. And it's just a matter for him that, like, he needs his job and he can't take time off to, like, try and learn how to be a game programmer or anything like that. And I fully understand that it's a privilege I have, but I think, it's a privilege I have, but hopefully I can use that privilege to, make the industry, less difficult to get into and more approachable for more kinds of people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm fixing it. So I'm popping. This is gonna be so stupid throughout. I'm popping in my other camera right now. But like, just as a reminder, right? Just kind of go off what you're saying. For anybody that's in Discord, in the chat rooms, this is a time for you to kind of ask directly to Mew, through me, because I don't want to fumble you up with ridiculous questions. So I'm going to be filtering a lot of the questions throughout the 3 days. So we do have moderators going through all those chat rooms. You have something specific to talk to Mew about, feel free to kind of drop a line, and I'll try my best to kind of read it online and on air. But before that happens, I have plenty of my questions for myself, and I kind of want to kind of dig through it, man. Like you were mentioning a few years before you kind of found somewhat of a rhythm. Of course, you're a success now. I mean, you're doing this full time, which is a lot already. How long was that process, man? If you were to say where you started to have doubts and you started to explore to now, how long did it finally, not to now specifically, but to the point where you felt you hit a rhythm where you're like, I'm starting to understand business in game development? Like
the business side is really hard, because I think there's two things to balance. I think, learning to program was a lot easier because, you eventually do find your brand of programming, but for the most part, you're just trying to become a better programmer. I think for me, when I got to the business side, there was a lot of trial and error of like what kind of business person I wanted to be. Like I think, for example, one of the times I was, trying to do networking, and one of my friends invited me to a dinner that basically ended up in a strip club and like all this other stuff. And I was just like, this can't be how business is done. Like, this isn't the kind of business person I want to be. And there's a lot of business people that, are very fake it till you make it, like just lie and lie and lie through your teeth and hope that, once you've got other people's money, you can profit off of it without losing it. But then if you lose it, it's their money. I think the business world is a lot more complicated. And like, I would go to basically 2 events every single night for, I think it was probably about 6 months. Not every night, but like probably 3 or 4 nights a week. And I'd be like, practicing my pitch for my company, but trying to figure out like, oh, how are they pitching stuff and what can I learn from them and what do I like about what this person is doing and this person isn't. But I think also finding the other people you want to work on. I think for someone to invest money in someone takes a bit of a relationship. So a lot of the times, you're meeting these people and you're trying to prove to them that you're the same kind of business person with the same level of trustworthiness and the same kind of trust as them. And I think that takes a lot of time. So our publisher, Double Fine, we've had a really good relationship with them personally for a long time. Like, we actually struck the deal because Greg was sleeping on Rex's couch for Res, which is an indie event in London. And I've known Tim Schafer because, that time when I said in 2007, I couldn't find a single job opportunity that wasn't first-person shooter or some kind of shooter. I specifically remember this moment because I was on the Insomniac balcony. I was talking to a recruiter, and he was just like, okay, well, the only game I have that's like not a shooter, and I can't tell you where it's from or too many details, but it's like, a heavy metal action RTS game. And I'm just like, what is that? What does that mean? And that turned out to be Brutal Legend. But because I just had no idea. I'd always been in touch with Tim about working at Double Fine, and I think if they said Double Fine has a position open, I probably would have ended up in San Francisco instead of in Guildford. But the guy just, sometimes recruiters are not allowed to give too many details of job opportunities away, and because he just described it so weirdly, I just kind of ignored it, which is a shame.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things too, like you were talking about, Tim Schafer is definitely a legend within the industry. And I think if anything, he has a huge part to kind of kicking off this indie life, that the possibility of not just scraping by, but also having the ability to kind of go out there, fend for yourself, have a product and see it all the way through to publishing and reap whatever, risks and benefits that entails. And I think it's crazy kind of thinking about the first Kickstarter that kind of kickstarted in my opinion, right? And then to now where developers like yourself are finally kind of taking the torch and kind of carrying it yourself, learning from these guys. And we're talking about a short span of, I would say within 4 or 5 years when the first major, when they went that route, right?
Yeah, I think they did it in maybe 2012, I think, and we did it in 2016. And I think that was one of those things of we had a good relationship with them, and it made sense that it ended up with our publisher. But for example, they offered to take a look at our Kickstarter campaign before it launched and give us advice on it. So they were just a perfect example for me on many fronts. And one of them is developers helping other developers. They were really good about, funding indie projects and publishing indie projects, but also just helping lots of projects that they had no financial interest in just because, they thought the idea was cool. And they've always put on Day of the Devs, which is a huge showcase of indie games. So I think, they've always been somewhat a company that I've looked up to in terms of what I want to do and how I can also have positive change in the industry.
Mm-hmm. And I haven't had my skin in the game as long as you have. I'm still operating out of a motel room, right? Wink, wink. So from the short time span that I've been doing this, a lot of it has been about putting yourself out there to kind of have these doors open and not really knowing what the outcome in your life or career is going to go. I had a faint idea before I started where I wanted to go and be at this place, but then it wasn't really driven by experience or anything of that sort. It was kind of make it up as I go. And a lot of it was influenced by people who's kind of ahead of me and just meeting them and just waiting and making good, not burning any bridges. I think another part of that is that early in my career, right? We would get these warnings from veterans or experienced developers around us saying hey, never burn bridges. You never know. Right. Yep. But then there was these times where I was if you're going to burn bridges, I'm going to fucking burn it. Right. And I had this little face where I was I'm fully committed. And then in full circle, I'm seeing myself as a veteran now and going on to create my own opportunities where I'm kind of going back to these burnt bridges and realizing, oh, wow, I was really rash and short term in my thinking. I mean, I wonder if you had similar stories in that mindset.
Kind of. Like, I definitely agree. Like, you shouldn't burn bridges unnecessarily, but I definitely think there are times to burn bridges. And there's definitely times that I've burnt bridges that I wish I hadn't, but there's also times I've burnt bridges where, I've dealt with people that I think are despicable and that nobody should work with them. And I'm happy I burnt those bridges. And I'm happy that I've been able to warn people off of situations that sound really enticing that they really wouldn't have enjoyed. But on the other hand, yeah, I've definitely burned, in my early career, I definitely burned a few bridges I probably shouldn't have. But one thing you did say, like, sort of that idea of like, going to these events, putting yourself out there and trying to like find the next generation to gatekeep you in. And the thing that I've actually learned is that it's your peers that are like the really interesting ones. Like, I was part of a program here in the UK, part of BAFTA's program called Crew. And I remember when I joined Crew, there were so many like young, really full of energy, ambitious, excited people of saying like, oh, here's what I want to do. And one day I'm going to do this and this kind of stuff. And, I was a little bit older, but I still like loved their energy and loved their enthusiasm. And now like I look at where all those are 3 or 4 years later, and they're all in incredible positions and running like tons of programs that are helping other people get a leg up in the industry or that kind of thing. So I think, never discount your peers. I think your peers are the people that like, one, aren't going to look down on you, and two, that you can really vibe with them because you're in the same position, and they're going to be the future of the industry. And, you can always hope that they'll bring you along with them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at least for me, man, like, I think there was a phase where, I was really getting anxious within the industry. I was getting a little burnt out, where there was a time where I would see these guys, fresh blood come in the industry, bright-eyed, and there was kind of like a little lingering resentment, right? It's like, oh my, look at these kids, look at this energy, right? Like they don't know, right? But then it took a while where it finally felt like, this is reinvigorating. This is, this kind of reminds me of how I was when I was bright-eyed, and reminds me why I got in the industry in the first place. So if anything, it's a nice like full circle realization of, there's always going to be things that's going to happen within your career where you're going to always look at what's the next best thing. But it's also very healthy to kind of reflect on where you are right now. I mean, we're making games. This is literally a dream of ours since kids. And, especially where you are right now, you've able to kind of evolved and taken control, and instead of complaining, you've taken those issues that you've had and just made it disappear through your own hard work and stuff like that.
I think even like in writing the talk, I think that was the thing I realized. I was just like, what is the progression of like how I think about my place in the industry? And I think there's like a big step between like thinking of the industry as like this thing that like takes or doesn't take you, and that has all the power, and you're just, this weak thing that's, hoping to be led in the gates. And I think, when you start thinking about yourself and what you want to achieve in the industry, that becomes like really empowering. But I think the next step is when you realize that like the industry is changing, but like I always, like at the beginning, I feared that. I was like, the industry's changing and they're going to leave me behind and it's going to be terrifying. And then you realize like the industry is changing because of people working in the industry. And I'm a person working in the industry. So if I know what change I want to see in the industry, I can be part of it. And I think that was a really big eye opener for me, because I think up to that point, I was just always just like, well, wherever it goes, maybe it's going to leave me behind, and that's going to suck. And I know like, single-handedly, I'm not going to change everything, but like I can do my little part to make sure that there is a place for me in the industry, and there are places for people like me in the industry.
Mm-hmm. So I do have a question from the audience. This is from Jakil101. As a reminder, you guys can ask these questions. I'm gonna make myself laugh like the whole day. So this is when you started your career in game development. Had you had work prior in other types of software development?
So I had 2 internships that I'd done. So like I came straight out of college. So yeah, I took like my last final on the Friday, and I started at Insomniac on the Monday. So I didn't have any like proper professional experience. But the first, I think, 2 summers that I was at in college, I actually met a guy in my programming, one of my programming classes that they basically, he worked at a games company, and they were like, we need you to find us an intern. And he was like, I'm going to E3 next week. And I'm like, oh my God, how do you go to E3? And he's like, oh, if you work in the games industry, you can go to E3. I'm just like, can you get me in at E3? And he's like, well, like if you come work with us, like in the summer, you can go to E3 next year. I'm like, let's do that. So I had like 2-3 months stints at 2 different games companies, because that guy moved from one game company to another. So I think that was definitely like the big break for me, was that I was lucky enough that that guy got me 2 different internships. And like, once you can see how the sausage is made, like you can start adapting like the theory you have of programming with the actual industry version of programming. But then again, like when I went to Insomniac, it was a whole other level. Like it was so much more complicated than anything I'd done in those 2 summers.
Awesome. This is a question from Official Nebular Gaming. Do you need to have a degree to be called a game dev?
No, definitely not. Like you have to be able, like, I think if you're making a game, you're a game dev, and whether like that means downloading Unity and, you know, playing a sample, like you're a game dev. Like, I don't know, like you can call yourself a game dev no matter what.
Right. I think that's becoming increasingly more and more true. I think especially with the pandemic going around, and I don't even know how school systems are going to adopt into it. Essentially, I think there was some horror stories kind of being spread where a lot of these students were still being charged while they couldn't go to a physical school, and then they had like a really half-baked online experience in result of that. I mean, these are institutions obviously that continues to need the income, and like most businesses, they will crumble if suddenly the source stops, right? So in a way I kind of empathize, but in another, you know, I went through like a traditional, you know, college education, and it took me like 8 years to kind of pay it back with like stable job income, right? It was insane to expect that from anybody, to kind of start their 20s and live through their 20s commuting, and in most cases like moving around the country, and in your case your country, different country,
moving around the world.
Around the world, and it's very common, and it's just we're not set up in a way where I graduate from one campus and then across the street I can work for the next 20 years. I mean, most industries aren't set up like that anymore, but game industry especially, I feel like you starting off your career then that way can be very detrimental. So
I think, you know, for me, the value of college was probably much more that like an 18-year-old just isn't a mature human being. And like, you know, from countless perspectives, whether it was social or like the way I thought about learning when I was 18 was I thought you memorized a bunch of stuff. And I think the thing that college taught me was that learning is actually linking stuff to things you already know. And I think that was a shift that it took me, you know, my 3 years of college to figure out. And if you can learn that in another way, great. But like, if, you know, you need some time, and I think that's the thing, like I talk about safe spaces to try things and to grow and to fail. And I think college can be that for a lot of people, but I think the industry should be able to do that as well. So yeah, I'm not anti-college per se. Like I definitely think, you know, there's value for some people in university. I think there's value for me in university. Like even just like being forced to do group projects was like a big turning point for me, because I could code on my own, but like the idea of, you know, having my code mesh with someone else's code is a concept I don't think I would have experienced on my own. But again, it's another thing that hopefully we can, as industry, provide opportunities for as well.
Yeah, especially now. I mean, I'm a big proponent to online learning now, but even with the forced quarantine, it gets pretty lonely, man. That social aspect of it I really valued when I was in college. I made a lot of best friends for life through the experience being next to people. And so even with all this generation of developers who are so used to living through social media, I think we pretty much value social interaction at this point. I mean, I think if anything, we've answered it that yes, we need physical interaction, and online is not enough. Matrix, until they get those, until Valve kind of get those index fingers with physical touch going, it's just not at that place where we want to kind of dedicate our whole life to that. So I do have another question. This is from Bewilder Beast. Is there a particular work ethic, technique, or discipline that you could talk about? Being the sole developer, how do you maintain discipline and focus when it's just you and a keyboard?
So I guess the clarification there on Knights and Bikes is I wasn't the sole developer. There was an artist. I was the sole programmer on the project, and
it's okay. He's not here. The artist take credit. I did everything. No, I'm kidding.
And the easiest way to stay motivated is if there's an artist just churning out beautiful art every day, and every time you hit update from SVN, there's more beautiful shit for you to program. It's pretty easy to stay motivated in that situation. And even at times when I remember there were some times where there was a bunch of work Rex needed to do, that there wasn't much programming work for me to do. So I basically just jumped onto another project for, I think, 2 months, and I shipped Subsurface Circular with Mike Bithell. So I think, I don't go to any work ethic or any specific, paradigm to stay motivated, but I definitely think finding collaborators that excite you and finding things that you want to learn that excite you, finding skills that you can find value in yourself, those are things to stay motivated. But also, I think, for me, again, it all comes down to if everything isn't rooted in the change I want to see in the world, and if I accomplish that change, maybe I'll lose motivation, but the world is moving so slow and there's so many things that need to be fixed that I feel eventually whatever I'm doing is rooted in a change I want to see in the world. And I think that's never going to get solved. And my motivation being tied to that is always going to stay somewhat full. But I guess the other side of it is how do you not burn out? Because that's a risk that I always ran into of especially before my son was born. It was just, I work from home. It's so easy to just keep coding and keep coding and keep coding. I'd say that's more of the risk or more of the threat to me of just burning out and just not wanting to do it anymore just because your body is just so sick of it. And I think if I didn't have my wife to remind me this, I would get to points where she would just be just so you know, you're being really snappy and you clearly are exhausted and you're working too hard. Just
sounds like this morning for me.
Yeah, she'd be there to remind me that I'm working too hard and I need to find some balance, just go outside and
get some vitamin D, man. It's important, especially now.
Yeah.
So this is from Shadow Monarch 1. He's asking, belonging from India. He's from India, I guess. The game dev scene here is not too big. So how do I path that bridge between countries and get myself where I can even ask the do I belong question to myself? Could you tell me some of the ways I can check out the game dev industry? This is pretty relevant.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult. I mean, the short answer is it's not trivial because, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things online. There's a lot of communities. I watch a ton of GDC talks. I watch GDUX. I watch a lot of talks. I try and find communities online that you can interact with, but it's not a perfect substitute. It very much is just, if you can't find anything physically local, try and find something virtually local to you, and try and find communities that will, are at a similar level as you and where you can ask. One thing that I really like right now is in the UK, there's a games industry Slack. And so everyone in the games industry comes in and you can ask the dumbest questions in the world and nobody's going to judge you for it. And I think that's, it's the thing that I just keep coming back to is there are enough safe spaces for people to learn and grow. And I think, for you, what I would recommend is just start making a game. And whenever you have a problem, start Googling answers. And hopefully at some point, Googling answers to the specific problems you have will help you find communities where those those questions get answered on the internet, and that will, hopefully, be a beacon for you to start your journey. But it's not easy, that's for sure.
So this is actually a pretty good question that I'm pretty curious about. So this is from Andreas Retina. So how's the game dev industry in the UK compared to the US? Are there any key differences?
So I guess the biggest thing for me, at least, is I feel like it's connected. So the salaries in the UK are way lower than salaries in the US, which sounds like a bad thing, but it means the game budgets are lower and the creative risk is higher. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why everyone in America in 2007 was making a shooter, because the budgets are so high that you have to do the lowest risk thing. And I mean, ironically, if you and everyone else are doing the lowest risk thing, it's really, really high risk. So I think the UK industry, for me at least, it feels a lot more explorational and more experimental, because one, we have the NHS, so you don't have to, as a freelancer, you don't have to worry about healthcare or health insurance or anything like that. If you get sick, you will be taken care of. But just that, because the budgets on games are a little bit lower on average, I think there's more creative risk that's willing to be taken up in the UK. I also think that the UK has, a great organization called BAFTA, and they really, as a culture, support games. And because they've been doing so much work to put games in the spotlight, they have an award ceremony that just like the Oscar for games every year. And because, they have everyone suit up in tuxedos and make it seem like, we're professionals and this is an art form to be appreciated, I think there is more appreciation of the industry here. Where I think in America it's very commercial and very a bit more jaded, especially when you get to the general population and the news media coverage and that kind of thing. So I think those are the big differences to me. But okay. NHS is huge. Not having to pay, when you literally are running an indie game company, a lot of times you're trying to spend $0 or pounds, period. And just the fact of if every time you don't spend money on health insurance, you're increasing the mental strain of what is the risk if someone is unwell. It's just, there's nothing that makes it harder to focus on creative decisions when you're putting your own life on the line.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to thank you, Mu, for coming on, man. It's a great way to kind of kick off, because your story especially is exactly why GDUX was made in the first place. I share a lot of similarities in your journey. I've had my moments, even this morning, with the stress and all. My wife had to kind of take hold and calm the F down. But these are moments throughout business that we kind of figure things and try to move on and just learn by doing, basically. So before I kind of send you off, if you don't mind to kind of tell people out there how to find you, and we'll go ahead and just make that apparent so that people can find you on Twitter or wherever.
Yep, cool. On Twitter, I'm one of Mu, and it's on the screen. And recently, we released Knights and Bikes on Switch, PS4, and PC. So pick it up and give me monies.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much, Mu, for coming on, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
We'll talk some more, and and that's pretty much it, man. Thanks for everything, dude.
Awesome. Thanks. Later.
Later.
This is